I'm fighting like hell, and we're going to protect Canada. He's underestimating the Canadian people, the resilience of the Canadian people, and the strength of the Canadian people.
What people think here in Canada, that China is getting better treatment than their closest allies and friends.
Ontario signed a massive $20 billion deal with Volkswagen to build one of the largest battery gigafactories in North America, and not a single battery is headed for the United States. The plant in St. Thomas will produce enough batteries to power 1 million European electric vehicles each year. But this isn't just about EVs. It's a signal, a bold strategic pivot away from U.S. dependence. For decades, Canada and the U.S. built supply chains, power grids, and trade deals around the assumption that they were permanent partners, that North America moved as one. But now, a single province just broke that script. Ontario didn't make this move in isolation. It was a response, a direct answer to Washington's doubling of tariffs on Canadian steel and aluminum. While politicians in D.C. framed it as economic protection, Ontario saw it as a wake-up call, and it acted. The question now isn't just about batteries, it's about trust. If Ontario, a province so deeply tied to the U.S., auto sector can walk away. What does that mean for the rest of North America? What happens when the neighbor you built your economy with decides it no longer needs your market? And more importantly, what if others follow? This pivot didn't come out of nowhere. It was triggered when the Trump administration doubled tariffs on Canadian steel and aluminum to 50%. Ontario saw the writing on the wall. WHAT was once framed as protecting American jobs, suddenly felt like an attack on decades of binational cooperation. And instead of waiting for Washington to back down, Ontario flipped the script. In St. Thomas, the Volkswagen Gigafactory became more than just an industrial investment. It turned into a statement. Retraining programs kicked off for laid-off auto workers, not for Detroit's assembly lines, but for Düsseldorf's supply chain. The message was subtle but sharp. Ontario wasn't retreating. It was reloading. Parts once destined for Michigan were now being rerouted to Germany. Local suppliers who had long depended on U.S. buyers started receiving calls from European clients. For the first time in decades, Ontario's economic GPS was being reprogrammed, pointing east, not south. And the mood, it shifted fast. What started as a defense mechanism responding to tariffs morphed into something far more strategic. Ontario wasn't just shielding itself, it was building leverage, quietly, steadily, and with purpose. Because when trade policy becomes unpredictable, stability becomes strategy. And Ontario wasn't going to wait around to see if the next tariff hit harder. In St. Thomas, Ontario, a quiet revolution is breaking ground, 370 acres of industrial ambition, anchored by Volkswagen's $20 billion Gigafactory. But this isn't your typical North American auto story. It's a power move strategically built without a single unit earmarked for the U.S. The factory will eventually produce batteries for over 1 million electric vehicles every year, all destined for Europe. Not Detroit, not Texas, Europe. And that shift is more than just symbolic, it's structural. Inside the plant, over 3,000 workers will be directly employed, while tens of thousands more will benefit across Ontario's evolving energy economy, from mining towns to clean tech startups. Workers like Maria Santos, once part of the traditional auto supply chain, are now being retrained through provincial programs to work in battery assembly and energy systems. She's not just switching jobs, she's switching sectors. The raw materials. All local, nickel from Sudbury, lithium from Northern Ontario, cobalt from Indigenous managed lands. These aren't just minerals, they're currency in the new energy economy. And Ontario is holding a royal flush. By partnering with Europe instead of the U.S., Ontario avoids the volatility of American politics and tariffs and locks into stable EU climate mandates and battery supply quotas. For Volkswagen, this means security. For Ontario, it means leverage. Even the plant's power supply is symbolic. It runs on Ontario's nuclear and hydroelectric grid, a clean, reliable system the U.S. now depends on but no longer controls. The result, a battery hub engineered for global export, not continental integration. And here's the real gamble. Every vehicle powered by this factory will carry no trace of American input. It's a deliberate decoupling from the U.S. market, and a clear message that Ontario isn't just reacting to trade pressure, it's rewriting its economic future. For decades, the U.S. and Ontario built a shared power grid based on trust, not just treaties. But that trust shattered the moment tariffs turned into retaliation. In early 2025, when Ontario briefly imposed a surcharge on electricity exports to the U.S., it wasn't just a price signal, it was a warning shot. Simulations from Ontario's grid operators showed something shocking. If the province ever fully pulled the plug, the consequences would be immediate and brutal, not just for Canada, but for the U.S. too. Rolling blackouts in upstate New York, Michigan, and Minnesota could begin within days. Why? Because the grid is now so tightly integrated that no side can afford to go it alone. In Pickering, a nuclear power station outside Toronto, engineers explained that you can't just pause a reactor. "This isn't a light switch," said one operations manager. "Ontario's power keeps flowing whether or not the U.S. wants it, and when that flow gets blocked, the system begins to buckle." Suddenly, U.S. states realized this wasn't just a trade dispute. It was an energy crisis waiting to happen. Hospitals in rural Minnesota reviewed emergency generator plans never meant for geopolitical standoffs. In Michigan, officials quietly began rationing peak hour usage in vulnerable regions. Energy planners from Vermont to Wisconsin scrambled to update decades-old assumptions about grid security. And yet the most profound shift wasn't in kilowatts, it was in psychology. Ontario had shown it could weaponize cooperation itself, using infrastructure built for peace as leverage in a tariff war. The U.S. might control defense contracts or trade routes, but it doesn't control Canadian hydropower. And when trust evaporates, no tariff can restore the lights. This wasn't just a technical glitch. It was the moment both sides saw the grid for what it really was, not just wires and volts, but a fragile alliance dressed up as infrastructure. And when alliances break, the fallout isn't just economic, it's electric. In a move that stunned Washington, Canada's new Prime Minister Mark Carney chose Paris, not D.C., as the destination for his first official visit in 2025. The symbolism wasn't lost on anyone. At the Élysée Palace, Carney stood beside French President Emmanuel Macron to announce an unprecedented review of every defense and procurement contract tied to the U.S. It wasn't just diplomacy, it was a reset. Behind closed doors in Brussels, Canada's Foreign Affairs Minister Melanie Joly accelerated talks on expanding CETA Comprehensive Economic and Trade Agreement and pushing deeper defense integration with the EU. For the first time, Canadian officials openly questioned their reliance on American military platforms, especially the restrictive strings attached to U.S. tech exports. Now Canada's major defense players, BAE Systems Dassault Aviation, and even Sweden's Saab, are bypassing the Pentagon and aligning directly with European buyers. Joint fighter jet development local assembly deals and full tech transfer agreements are replacing what used to be a one-way procurement pipeline from Washington. The pivot is more than symbolic. Canada is building strategic autonomy, partnering with nations that offer longer contracts, fewer political strings, and mutual technology sharing. Defense is no longer just about security, it's about industrial policy, sovereignty, and resilience. As Carney's motorcade rolled through the streets of Paris, the message was loud and clear. Canada is no longer betting on American reliability. It's betting on European partnership. And the speed of this realignment suggests it's not a bluff, it's a blueprint. There was no big announcement, no viral headline, just a quiet shift contract by contract, investor by investor. In Windsor, a once idle electric vehicle charger factory began humming again, not to supply Detroit, but to ship units to Hamburg and Rotterdam. The destination had changed. So had the strategy. Across Ontario and beyond, the so-called Advanced Manufacturing Innovation Corridor has quietly become a magnet for Dutch and German capital. These aren't just one-off projects, they're long-term industrial bets. Facilities are being built with European regulations in mind, not U.S. standards. Workforce training programs are designed in collaboration with EU partners, and financing. It's increasingly coming from Brussels, not Wall Street. In Saskatchewan, wind power projects are now tied to Nordic energy markets, not Midwest grids. In Alberta, hydrogen production, once seen as an American supply opportunity, is being pipelined toward Asia and Northern Europe. Even in New Brunswick, battery corridor expansions are being designed to feed transatlantic and transpacific supply chains, bypassing U.S. ports entirely. This isn't isolationism. It's insulation from volatility, from tariffs, from American unpredictability. Canada isn't slamming the door shut. It's building a second door and making sure it opens to markets that don't threaten to close it on a whim. The result? A slow but irreversible industrial realignment. While Washington debates, Canada quietly diversifies. And one day the U.S. may look up and realize the factories are still here. They're just pointed somewhere else. Inside Ontario's Pickering nuclear station, engineers confronted a problem no politician could solve. You can't turn off a nuclear reactor on command. Across the province, Niagara's hydro turbines kept spinning, pouring electricity into a grid that until now flowed seamlessly across the U.S. border. But when political tensions boiled over, that cooperation fractured. Emergency simulations showed what no one wanted to admit: Ontario and U.S. states like New York, Michigan, and Minnesota are more energy entangled than anyone realized. Shutting off exports wouldn't just hurt the U.S., it could destabilize Ontario's grid, two overloading systems built for binational flow. In response, U.S. governors scrambled. Upstate hospitals dusted off backup generator protocols. Legislatures pushed through emergency energy plans to deal with the possibility of lost Canadian supply. Coal plants were put on standby, and natural gas usage surged, threatening climate targets and pushing up consumer prices. The deeper revelation: trust, not contracts, was what kept this system running. Once shaken, that trust doesn't return easily. These power lines weren't just carrying electricity, they were carrying decades of quiet cooperation. Now, with every terawatt-hour rerouted or politicized, both sides are realizing the grid isn't just infrastructure. It's a shared vulnerability. Money like energy flows where stability lives. In 2025, European capital is flooding into Canada, not from Washington, but from Oslo, Amsterdam, and Berlin. Clean energy projects across Saskatchewan's wind corridors and Alberta's hydrogen grids are now being financed with Norwegian sovereign wealth, Dutch agritech funds, and German green transition capital, and notably the payments are often in euros or yens, not US dollars. It's not just about profit, it's about trust. As US policy grows more volatile, European investors are quietly seizing the moment, offering long-term stability that American capital markets once promised. In return, they're securing Canadian lithium, cobalt, and infrastructure access for the next generation of climate tech. Even at home, the shift is visible. Major Canadian pension funds like CPP and O'Mears are dialing down their exposure to the U.S., redirecting billions into European-linked industrial corridors and innovation hubs. This isn't a currency war, it's a confidence migration. Canada isn't just attracting global capital, it's redefining who gets to shape the future of North America's green economy, and for the first time in decades, that future doesn't automatically run through Wall Street. There was no grand speech, no formal withdrawal, no banner headline, but look closely and the map has already changed. In 2025, Canada is no longer waiting for permission. Thousands of small strategic decisions, battery deals in Kingston, cobalt shipments redirected from Saskatchewan, EV components flowing to Hamburg instead of Detroit, are collectively redrawing the continent's economic architecture. And remarkably, it's all happening without severing ties. This isn't isolation. It's a quiet rebalancing, a parallel system taking shape, one that doesn't rely on Washington's political weather. The phrase whispered in Ottawa boardrooms is no longer free trade. It's strategic autonomy. Canada hasn't declared a new doctrine. It's built one by default by choosing consistency over chaos, trust over turbulence. The world noticed. Did Washington? So now the real question begins. Are we witnessing the first signs of a post-American North America? Or is Ontario just an outlier? Could Quebec or British Columbia be next? Could energy manufacturing, even defense, quietly decouple from their southern partner? And most importantly, what does this mean for U.S.-Canada relations, the future of cross-border supply chains, and who really holds influence on this continent? Let us know what you think. Drop your thoughts in the comments, like, subscribe, and hit the bell.